On November 4, 1970, the Los Angeles police received a report that would forever change the life of a 13-year-old girl. What they found upon arriving at the scene was something no one could have imagined. A girl, weighing only 57 pounds, confined and treated inhumanly, like an irrational animal. Wearing diapers, with difficulties in movement and feeding, her situation was heartbreaking. And the most shocking of all, the person responsible for this cruel treatment was none other than her own father. Stay with me until the end of the video and discover all the details of this case that shocked the world. Genie was rescued on November 4, 1970, after 13 years of captivity and abuse. Her mother, Dorothy, finally decided to flee from her husband Clark Wiley, taking Genie with her. Dorothy was seeking support for her visual impairment and accidentally entered a social services office in Los Angeles County. It was then that social workers noticed Genie's alarming condition. When found, Genie was severely malnourished, weighing only 57 pounds, which is approximately half the weight expected for her age. Her appearance was that of a 6 or 7-year-old child due to extreme malnutrition. She had significant difficulties in locomotion, crossing her hands in front of her body and walking in an uncoordinated manner. Additionally, Genie couldn't speak, would relieve herself anywhere, and involuntarily drawled and spat. Genie demonstrated limited understanding, only recognizing her name and the phrases "stop it" and "no more." Her ability to focus her eyes or fully extend her body limbs was impaired. She occasionally touched herself intimately without caring about the presence of others and, despite getting upset or angry, never cried. The professionals who found her were horrified by her physical, emotional, and psychological state. Initially, they thought Genie might have some degree of autism, but quickly realized that her conditions were the result of abusive behavior and the deprivations she had been subjected to. Doctors diagnosed that she could barely swallow or chew due to 2 years of abuse and neglect. Genie was taken to a children's hospital, where she began to receive intensive medical and psychological care. Clark Wiley, Genie's father, was born in 1901 and grew up in California. He worked as a machinist in Los Angeles during and after World War II. Clark was a controlling individual who hated noise and didn't want children. However, he ended up having 4 children with his wife, Dorothy Irene Oglesby. Genie had 3 siblings. The first girl died from being left in a cold garage, the second baby died due to birth complications, and the third, John, survived. 5 years after John's birth, Genie was born, who became known worldwide due to her case of extreme abuse and isolation. In 1958, Clark's mother, PMA Martin, was accidentally killed by a drunk driver. This event led Clark to develop a permanent state of anger and paranoia. This emotional state led him to brutalize his children, especially John and Genie. It was during this time that Clark began to keep Genie locked in a room. Genie was kept in a locked room, where there was a bathroom and a crib. Her arms and legs were tied and immobilized in the crib at night, and during the day, she was tied to a chair. Clark prohibited any interaction with Genie, completely isolating her from any social or educational stimuli. In addition to physical confinement, Genie also suffered from extreme malnutrition, as she received an insufficient amount of food, consisting mainly of baby food, boiled eggs, and cereals. Clark forced John to abuse Genie, and any attempt by her to express herself verbally was physically punished, creating a silence conditioned by fear. Genie's mother and brother were forbidden to speak to her, and neighbors were unaware of her existence. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. On November 4, 1970, Dorothy decided to flee from her husband, taking Genie with her. Seeking help for her visual impairment, Dorothy accidentally entered a social services office in Los Angeles County, where social workers noticed Genie's alarming condition. When found, Genie was severely malnourished, weighing only 57 pounds, with the appearance of a 6 or 7-year-old child due to extreme malnutrition. She had significant difficulties in locomotion, crossing her hands in front of her body, and walking in an uncoordinated manner. Genie couldn't speak, would relieve herself anywhere, and involuntarily drawled and spat. She demonstrated understanding only of her own name, and to specific phrases, "Stop it" and "no more." This limited comprehension indicated that during the years of abuse, she had only been exposed to an extremely restricted vocabulary, reflecting the lack of social and verbal interaction she suffered. Her linguistic abilities were practically non-existent, and any attempt at verbal expression was severely punished, resulting in a forced silence conditioned by fear of constant beatings from her father, Clark Wiley. Genie's linguistic development was severely compromised due to this neglect and extreme abuse, culminating in an almost total inability to communicate when she was rescued. The professionals who found her were horrified by her physical, emotional, and psychological state. Initially, they thought Genie might have some degree of autism, but quickly realized that her conditions were the result of abusive behavior and the deprivations she had been subjected to. Doctors diagnosed that she could barely swallow or chew due to 2 years of abuse and neglect. After her rescue, Genie Wiley was taken to a children's hospital, where a team of doctors and researchers began to care for her. They subjected her to various diagnostic tests to assess her physical and mental conditions. Among the initial diagnoses, it was observed that Genie had significant difficulties in chewing and swallowing food, which was directly related to her state of extreme neglect and malnutrition. Additionally, Genie's brain patterns were shown to be abnormal, but doctors couldn't determine whether these anomalies were the result of a congenital deficiency or the years of abuse and isolation she had suffered. The multidisciplinary team in charge of Genie's care included professionals such as Susan Curtis, a linguistics specialist who was responsible for Genie's language development. James Kent, a psychologist, took care of the girl's emotional development, while psychiatrist Jay Shirley and her team conducted examinations to assess Genie's mental health. The exam results showed that Genie had abnormal brain patterns, which could be a consequence of the degrading treatment she received. Initially, Genie could only say words like blue, orange, mother, and go. Most of the time, she remained silent, and any attempt to force her to speak resulted in episodes of incontinence, indicating profound insecurity and extreme fear. Genie's case generated great academic and media interest, being widely publicized and discussed. Her recovery and treatment became an urgent priority for the professionals involved. Initially, Genie was taken to a children's hospital, where a team composed of doctors, linguists, and psychologists began to work with her. The multidisciplinary team aimed not only to treat her debilitated physical conditions, but also to explore and try to remedy the psychological and cognitive impacts of the extreme isolation to which Genie had been subjected. The first step was to address her critical physical conditions. Genie was severely malnourished, weighing only 57 pounds at 13 years old. Her musculature was weak due to lack of movement, and she had difficulties in chewing and swallowing solid foods. Genie's needs were basic and urgent: adequate nutrition, muscle strengthening, and personal hygiene, as she was accustomed to using diapers and had no control over her bodily functions. Doctors identified abnormal brain patterns that indicated interrupted development due to isolation. Her motor coordination was extremely limited, which made it difficult to perform simple tasks such as walking or holding objects. A team of linguists, psychologists, and occupational therapists was assigned to work with Genie, with the aim of better understanding the effects of isolation on her cognitive and language development. One of the biggest concerns was Genie's ability to acquire language. At first, Genie didn't speak. She only emitted guttural sounds similar to those of a baby. However, with time and constant intervention, Genie began to show progress. In the first year of treatment, she managed to learn about 100 words. This initial advance was considered a great success, given her previous state. Linguists and psychologists used a patient and adaptive approach, introducing Genie to new words and concepts gradually. They used objects, images, and repetition to help her associate words with meanings. Genie showed interest in learning, which was a positive factor in her rehabilitation process. After the initial treatment at the Children's Hospital, where Genie began to recover from critical physical and cognitive conditions, she was taken in by John Butler, a dedicated teacher who became deeply involved in her development. Butler provided a stable and safe environment, essential for Genie's continued progress. She continued to work tirelessly on Genie's linguistic and cognitive development, helping her expand her vocabulary and improve her communication skills. Butler's dedication was crucial for Genie's initial advancement, who, despite the traumas, began to show signs of recovery and interest in learning. Later, Genie went to live with David and Marilyn Rigler. David Rigler, a psychologist who was already involved in studying her case, provided Genie with continuity in specialized treatment. The move to the Riglers' house marked a new phase in her life. Under the Riglers' care, Genie continued to receive intensive therapy, which included regular sessions of occupational, psychological, and linguistic therapy. The Riglers' approach was holistic, focusing not only on the development of cognitive and linguistic skills, but also on Genie's emotional and social well-being. However, despite the significant progress Genie made during this period, she continued to face substantial challenges. The recovery was not linear, and Genie still experienced outbursts of fury and insecurity. These behaviors were reflections of the deep traumas she had suffered during the years of isolation and abuse. The outbursts of anger and moments of extreme insecurity showed that, despite the advances, the psychological effects of the cruel treatment she had been subjected to were lasting and complex. The team working with Genie had to deal with these daily challenges, adapting their approaches to meet Genie's emotional and behavioral needs. The Riglers continued to provide a structured and loving environment, but the complexity of Genie's traumas meant that complete recovery would be a long and uncertain process. The Riglers' dedication, as well as that of Jean Butler earlier, was crucial in offering Genie the opportunity for a more normal life and to develop skills that would allow her some independence. However, the path to Genie's full recovery was fraught with obstacles, and each small progress was accompanied by new emotional and behavioral challenges that the team of caregivers needed to face. The studies on Genie aroused significant scientific interest, especially in the areas of cognitive development and language acquisition. Researchers explored how her case could provide insights into the effects of extreme isolation in childhood. In 1974, however, funding for this research was abruptly cut, which interrupted the intensive care she was receiving from the Riglers. This interruption in 1975 marked the end of the initial phase of Genie's intensive treatment and study, leaving important questions about her development without immediate answers. Clark Wiley, Genie's father, committed suicide on November 20, 1970, after the discovery of the deplorable state in which Genie was found and the subsequent complaint made by his wife, Dorothy Wiley. The pressure of investigations and the implications of his actions led Clark to a point of despair. He took his own life by firing a shotgun at his head. This extreme act occurred shortly after he was formally accused of the abuses committed against Genie, ending his life and the possibilities of him facing the legal consequences of his actions. Clark Wiley's suicide left a tragic mark on the case, profoundly affecting the family dynamics and Genie's subsequent living conditions, who then had to be placed under the guardianship of the state of California. After Clark Wiley's suicide, The circumstances of Genie's life underwent significant changes. Her mother, Dorothy Wiley, who had reported the abuse and the situation in which Genie lived, tried to reassume responsibility for her daughter's care. However, due to her own debilitated condition and Genie's special needs, she was unable to provide the necessary care. Dorothy's inability to adequately care for Genie led to the decision to place her in foster homes. In foster homes, Genie faced a series of new challenges. The transition to different environments was difficult, and the continuity of her treatment and development suffered interruptions. Each new home meant an adaptation to new caregivers and treatment methods, which impacted her emotional stability and progress. During this period, the state of California assumed legal and practical responsibility for Genie's welfare. Life under state guardianship included periods where Genie was subjected to institutional care and foster families. Fluctuations in the quality of care received affected her ongoing development. While some foster families and institutions were able to offer a more structured and therapeutic environment, others were not prepared to deal with Genie's complex needs, resulting in variable experiences of care and support. The years that followed were marked by a constant struggle to balance Genie's emotional, cognitive, and physical needs with the limited resources available. Despite the difficulties, Genie's case continued to be of great interest to psychologists, linguists, and other professionals who saw in her a unique opportunity to study the effects of extreme isolation in childhood and human resilience. The impact of Genie's case goes beyond her own challenges and progress. It generated ethical and scientific debates about the treatment of individuals who have undergone similar experiences, and about best practices for promoting recovery and development in such cases. Genie, now an adult, remains under state care, living a life that, although far from ideal, is marked by the ongoing struggle to overcome the traumas of her past and find a path to dignity and hope. Currently, Genie lives under the care of the state of California, where she has remained since her mother was unable to provide the necessary care for her father's suicide. The state assumed legal and practical responsibility for her welfare, which included placing Genie in various foster homes and institutions over the years. The constant transition between different environments presented considerable challenges to her emotional stability and continued progress, but also provided some opportunities for her to develop communication skills and independence under the supervision of dedicated professionals. Genie's case continues to be a point of intense interest and study among psychologists, linguists, and other specialists. Her unique experience of extreme isolation and subsequent attempt at social reintegration offers valuable insight into human resilience and the capacity for recovery, even after significant trauma. Professionals from various disciplines compare Genie's development to other known cases of severe deprivation and isolation, seeking to better understand how these experiences shape cognitive, emotional, and social development. Ethical and scientific debates about treatment methods and best practices for supporting individuals in similar situations continue to be informed by Genie's case. Although Genie's life under state care has not been easy, the dedication of caregivers and the continued interest of the scientific community have provided her with some stability and progress. Her story serves as a powerful testimony to the lasting consequences of abuse and neglect, as well as the strength and determination needed to overcome such adversities. The case of Genie Wiley remains a relevant and discussed topic, reflecting the complexity of the challenges faced by those working to help victims of extreme abuse and highlighting the importance of robust and compassionate support systems. If you liked the video, leave your comment and see you in the next story.